Thanks for coming back. I think this is the last video in my Rust series where I'm trying to give aliens recovery behaviors using something like the strategy pattern. The goal was to learn how to put behaviors, code snippets, into structs. When I last left you, I had successfully put code into a struct using a boxed trait object. And that was an improvement because now I could make a list of aliens. That looked like this. My only trouble was, if I let the closure capture something, I had to use a move. And then I couldn't see what was happening to that value from my main. So here, where my closure captured recovery strength, it had to be a move. And then my main couldn't see it anymore. For this particular situation, it might be reasonable to be able to ask how much recovery strength is left. So I would like to be able to access it from outside of that closure. So I have two goals for how to fix this code. The first is to be able to capture the recovery strength without using move. And then the second is to be able to see the current value of the recovery strength from outside of the closure. I have achieved both of those goals after hours and hours of playing with things. So let me just show you how I did them. It turns out that the capture of recovery strength having to be a move is because I made this field require a lifetime of static. Because it is attached to a trait, so it is a trait bound, that means that the type, in our case, the original type of our trait object, will only contain static references. Well, the data that we own has a static lifetime, so we have to move recovery strength because it's a local variable. And if it went out of scope, of its scope, before our Mighty Max was out of scope, it would be dropped and Mighty Max would be in trouble. You and I can look at this and know that everything's okay, so we can be less dramatic with the lifetime requirement. We don't need that static. What we want is for the alien to get its lifetime from recovery strength's lifetime. So I added a lifetime generic to the struct and changed the lifetime on the closure to be that lifetime. In the new, I connected that A to the trait object, and that tells it that when the trait object gets dropped, the box gets dropped. And the trait object will be dropped when the recovery strength goes out of scope. So I know that the alien knows that everything will be there as long as it needs to be there. With that change, I can delete this move and give Mighty Max mutably borrowed access to recovery strength. We've achieved the first goal. However, if I try to look at the value in recovery strength while Mighty Max is in scope, I can't, because I gave Mighty Max a mutable borrow. I still own recovery strength, but I can't look at it right now. If I give Mighty Max a smaller scope, I can see it after Mighty Max is gone. But my second goal was to be able to see the value even after I've given that mutable access to Mighty Max. In order to accomplish this, we're breaking one of Rust's rules. When someone has a mutable borrow, no one else can access it. There is a way to do it, but we're going to have to sacrifice the fact that the compiler checks the borrowing rules. They're still going to be checked, but they'll be checked at runtime instead of at compile time. To do this, we have to use a RefCell wrapping around our recovery strength. A RefCell is a mutable memory location with a dynamically checked borrowing rules. So when you want to get mutable access to the RefCell, you have to explicitly borrow it immutably. And when you want immutable access, you just borrow it. Let's read through this and make sure you see what I'm doing. In the recovery behavior closure that I'm giving the alien, it captures the RefCell. When that closure gets called, it will mutably borrow it. That gives us a mutable reference to it, and we have to change that reference when we're playing with it. But this will use the value and decrement it every time we tell the alien to recover. Then I use borrow to print out its current value, whack the alien, print out the alien, and tell it to recover. At that point, its life points should be 55 because it should have gotten 5 back. and then it decrements the recovery strength. So when I use borrow to look at the recovery strength again, it should be 4. For good measure, I made it recover one more time and see that the recovery strength goes to 3. Let's watch that work. That all seems so straightforward, but it took me hours to get that to work. Remember, the borrowing checking is still happening, but it's happening at runtime. To show you why that matters, let's make it capture the mutably borrowed value instead of borrowing it inside the closure. The compiler is content with this code, but when I run it, it panics. The line it's panicking at is 61, where I try to borrow it, and it correctly tells me that it's already mutably borrowed. See, those borrowing rules are being enforced, just at runtime, instead of compile time. So the trick to actually making it work was borrowing it inside the closure, so that the borrowed copy gets dropped at the end of each execution of the closure. That allowed me to use borrow to look at the value in between the calls on the closure. But notice, I had to make sure I got rid of my borrowed reference before I called recovery, or the mutable borrow would fail at runtime. At this point, I've done 3 of the 4 examples for how to put code into a struct, and I'm content that I've learned a lot by trying to make these examples work for my aliens. The 4th strategy is a trait object reference, and I think I've learned enough that I can read that example and see how it would work with my aliens. Now my learning has to go in a new direction. I am absolutely sure that I need to add Rust to at least 2 of my classes. My students need to see this. In particular, I want to add it to crafting quality code this fall. That means that I need to stop playing and start making videos that will help my students, who are Java and C literate, use Rust. I need to figure out what are the most important Rust features to teach them, because they obviously aren't going to be full Rust developers in a semester. And then I need to make videos that help them see the value of those features and be able to explore them in the projects in my class. If you have suggestions for what I should focus on, please leave a comment. As a clue, the first video I'm working on is motivating ownership and borrowing. Check it out.